After some time had passed, I was able to get the card reader to finally open the lock, and the grate started to rise. But once it did, I heard large, thunderous footsteps coming in my direction. I turned around to see a giant of a man, his face grey, his head bald, wearing a large trench coat. Interesting. It was at this point that my communicator had signaled that I just encountered another enemy target. Oh, great. So this is what they're sending after us. This was not as easy of a fight as I had had with William Birkin. This creature was more deliberate in its strikes. It also seemed to shake off damage quite a bit easier. But after a while of putting bullets and knives into it, it eventually fell, only to a knee. It didn't seem to kill it, but it was incapacitated. So I proceeded to exit the police station as quickly as possible and head out into the Raccoon City streets. Ada had informed me that Sherry Birkin was being held at the local orphanage and had set a waylay point so that it would be easy for me to find. After making my way through a few rogue zombies and a pack of dogs, I found myself at the front of the Raccoon City Child Orphanage. A very cartoonish-looking blue raccoon and a polka dot giraffe decorated the front doors. I made my way through and locked the gate behind me. The outside of the building looked very old. It may even have been an old church at one point, but I'm not sure. The outside yard had been converted into what looked like a playground. Well, it's nice to know that the kiddies here would at least be getting some amusement in such a foul place. Once inside, I proceeded to search for Sherry and Chief Irons. After a little bit of searching, I ran into Chief Irons, half of his face looking as if it had been melted off. He reached forward as to grab me, but I was too quick and took a step back. Then he clutched his chest as something burst forth from it, and then it proceeded to crawl off somewhere. Unfortunately, I lost sight of it, but it was of no consequence. I proceeded to head down this hallway until I came into what looked like a large office of some sorts. In the back of the office, there was a stairwell leading down. I followed it down into the basement. There I found Sherry. But then something else found me. It is the large creature from earlier. It appears that he had followed me here. I looked at Sherry and told her, "We've got to run. Move!" We kept running for quite some time, passing through the different hallways, going even deeper underground, until we found ourselves in an elevator. I quickly pushed the button to close it, and the gates closed, and we started to head down. I could hear the roar of the creature above us. Once we were at the bottom, we found ourselves in what looked like it could have very easily been a sewer. Then suddenly, I heard the sound of a shutter open, and then Sherry disappeared. I looked around quite confused, and then I noticed that one of the chutes that had left to the garbage had happened to open. Quite weird. I'll have to find a way to get to where that chute lets out now. I'll have to retrieve her. I proceeded lower into the facility, and it appears that I was correct. Indeed, I had found myself in the sewers. Oh my. I hope Sherry's quite alright. If she had cut herself on anything, sepsis was, well, guaranteed to set in, especially in this kind of environment. So I proceeded quickly through the sewers. Eventually I came across an odd cable car. We'll make note of that. They might be useful later. After finding the cable car, I headed inside. This appeared to be the disposal facility for the sewer system. It was not much longer after that I heard a female voice, an adult female voice, as if it was being broadcasted over some kind of PA system. I looked over to a glass window that was not far from where I was, and looked down. There was Sherry in some kind of garbage heap. I'm guessing this was where they took all the garbage at the end of the day.
Sherry, I told you, I cannot leave here until my work is done.
That's what you always say.
Why didn't you stay in the house? It was safe there.
I was scared. Those things were everywhere, and...
You should have called the police. That's what we taught you.
I did, but nobody came, and you didn't answer your phone, so...
Sherry, I don't have time for this.
To the conversation between Sherry and her mother, Sherry passed out. Don't worry, Sherry, I'm on my way. I left the room and proceeded to find a way to get to Sherry. She couldn't be doing too well. She seemed to suddenly faint. That cannot be a good sign. After making my way through more of the facility, I found myself back in some very gross and disgusting sewers. I came across an inferior G infected. The creatures were quite grotesque and monstrous. Almost nothing of their human form even remained, but they did not serve me too much of an issue. They were quite slow and easy to get around. They were still quite massive, and in the small enclosed spaces, they didn't make it any easier. But fortunately, after a bit of trekking through this area of the sewers, I re-emerged back into the facility. They had appeared to have merged in what appeared to look like an odd warehouse. It had a very unusual mechanism of keeping the doors open and closed. These odd chest-looking plugs. Fortunately for me, the doors, even if they were closed, served no way of barring me, and I could easily open them. After having a look around, I happened across a flamethrower and some other very unusual looking weapon. I'm willing to bet that Oni and young Master Cross are having quite a bit of fun, but they could probably do with some more weapons. At least Master Cross would. So I proceeded to grab the weapons, and I dropped them in a nearby chest. I checked the side. It read, Vincent von Holt Incorporated. Oh, this must be one of ours. I left the items in the chest, and then proceeded forward. I found a very large and unusual locked door. It seemed to have some kind of electronic lock, but unfortunately no way to hack it. Only an old elaborate system for plugs. I see, this must be what those plugs are really meant for. But they're not all here. But then it dawned on me, oh no, I'm going to have to do some backtracking. I shook my head at this progress. Oh great, I'm going to have to wallow around in more of the poo water. The things I do for missions. I left what plugs that I could find here as I proceeded to backtrack through the facility to find the remaining plugs. After much searching, I was able to acquire the remaining plugs. I also left a note for Ani to let them know that I'd left some items for him in the box. I then proceeded to make my way back to the sealed door and input the remaining plugs. After I did, and they were put in the proper order, which took me a few moments to figure that out, the door opened up and I proceeded inside. Proceeding farther down, I came to a corridor that eventually led me to the entrance to where Sherry was being held, and a large switch not too far from it. I flipped the switch. Nothing happened. It must be out of power. There's got to be a breaker box nearby. And I was correct. In the room not too far from where I currently was, there was a breaker box. It was a bit difficult, but not too hard to figure out how to turn it back on without overloading it. I flipped the switches, and the power proceeded to click on. I then ran over and opened the door, and there was Sherry lying on a pile of trash, right where I had seen her faint before. She wasn't looking too good. A large red ring had appropriated around her left eye. I took a medical scan. It appears that she had been implanted with a G-virus embryo. Well, this is great. Fortunately, I had the proper equipment on hand in order to synthesize a cure for this, but it would take some time. So, I proceeded to start the synthesis process. I picked up Sherry and I headed back to the cable car. I laid her down inside and proceeded to take her to the top. It just so happened to let us out into a facility that was directly under our evac point. I proceeded to the back of the facility and up the elevator. When I reached the top, I found what looked like a very large helicopter. My father and his target already there. I said nothing as I proceeded to enter the helicopter and put Sherry on one of the beds that happened to be on this thing. There seemed to be a lot of medical equipment around. It was quite odd and strange, I thought to myself. I sat down and watched my equipment as it started to synthesize the cure. It had more than enough time to process, and it would only take a few moments to actually make it. Once it had finished, I injected Sherry with it, and then all we could do was wait.
Ah, you did quite well. I didn't expect you to get this far. And frankly, I was expecting someone else. But oh well, I guess you'll do. Now then, which one of my magnificent horrors will you fight?